Hi everyone.
Hello.
Dasha's here and we're ready to start. Thank you again for joining us. We are happy to be here with you today, and I'm proudly presenting Daryna Sizhuk, Senior Business Development Manager, Ukraine, Caucasus and Central Asia.
Hello everyone.
Hi, being here with us. So we're beginning, and hi, okay, everyone's saying hello.
Yeah, and a lot of familiar names again, so hello everyone. Good to see some people online. Hoping that the quarantine is still not pushing you out away of your works, and hope you still will have time during the weekend to enjoy yourself out of the thoughts of the COVID. Probably thinking and doing something for your pleasure at home.
Yeah, developing, for example, professionally. Yeah, we're going to talk about serious stuff today. So let's get started. We're going to cover some things listed here. We will talk about characteristics of learners aged 11 plus, teenagers and adults. We're going then to look at 6 ways, just as the name of the webinar, of how assessment informs learning. We will look at roles of assessment and a bit at the motivational part and the theory of motivation. And so we will share our experience, practical ideas, and we hope that you will share with us too. Before we organized this webinar, we thought of including these 3 points as the introduction, as some philosophical thoughts about learning. However,
we're living in a too fast developing world, I would say, because when we were planning the webinar, the way teachers taught was very traditional, face-to-face. Some teachers rarely used online in their everyday routine, and like one from Monday on, mostly everyone is now experts in Zoom, Skype and all other platforms. Everybody shifted, the teaching and the learning, of course, also changed.
Yeah, we have been using Zoom for quite a while now, and now it's the new era, and I think Zoom guys out there are very happy that so many people are using it. Hope you also enjoy using the platform and the digital transformation, as we call it, and that's why our current life experience impacts the way our students are learning even now at this very moment. Although we do have some feedback that teachers moving online is a bit of a difficult process, students as well. Yeah, so we all are getting used to learning online, preparing for exams, still staying on track of what's going on, and teachers are challenged to make effective teaching online now as well.
Yeah, with the good news that what is stable is the teaching still needs to bring results. And I think there will be forever the dispute between learning and assessment. What comes first? It's like a chicken and the egg. So if it's first assessment, then learning, and then maybe learning and then assessment, and maybe all together. And that's exactly what we are going to discuss during the webinar today.
Yeah. So let's then start by talking and thinking about learners aged 11 plus. We mean teenagers. Yeah, I think we see one of the participants as well. Can you think about the characteristics of a learner 11 plus until adulthood, so teenagers? What are the positive characteristics of the learners of this age? Can you let us know in the chat box? Positive characteristics of teenage learners.
Right, we see some first responses. So Olga types active, and that's true. Yana, sociable, right? Curious.
Anything else? Curious, sociable, active.
Easily distracted. It's more of a negative. Yeah, we will turn on to them in a minute. Interested in what's going around, right? All right. A lot witty. That's true. Let's look into the negative ones, if there are any. Maybe you're lucky to have a very positive teenagers. All right, so we had the one that they are easily distracted. Any other negative features of learners aged 11 plus? Depend on the opinion of peers, right? Naughty.
Addicted to mobiles, yeah.
Yeah, which you can actually turn to positive, especially these days. Well, being addicted to mobiles, they have all their chances doing all the online studies this day online via the mobile.
Yeah, challenging the boundaries of others. Oh, that's an
all right.
one.
Yeah, that's a fun. I think after the quarantine, they would probably hate their mobiles for the time being.
Computers, mobiles.
Yeah.
Everyone will be digital free once we get out.
Good. Let's see what our suggestions are.
So we have the positive part. Some of them were mentioned already in the chat box. The interesting and the one that we would probably want to stress would be risk-taking, which is important for learning a language, because a lot of times when you try to use something in your speech, it's about taking a risk. And when students say that they're afraid to talk, this is a feature that is actually not working, risk-taking.
And I would like to stress independence, because generally, I mean, this is the very big difference between young learners and teens. When they are teens, they can be given tasks, they can work on their own, they can control themselves or one another. So there's a lot of opportunities for teaching them.
Yeah, and the negative characteristic, low self-esteem, can also impact their performance, as they basically sometimes don't believe in their own efforts, power, what they can do really. And we will look at that and how to empower our students, if we may say that. Okay, so let's try to reconcile assessment and learning and see how many things we can do and how assessment can help motivate our students. So the question is, again, we would like to know your opinion. How can assessment help motivate our students? A lot of times when we hear the word assessment, this is something very serious, perhaps scary, but as teachers, how can that help motivate our students? Let us know in the chat box. How can assessment help motivate our students?
Okay, so it's goal setting, right, Andrei? Sometimes it can also demotivate. I just remember exams from my university. Some of them were really demotivating.
To see
real level of their knowledge.
Yeah.
Being more focused, sees the rising of skills.
Yeah, when skills are improved, you need some proof of that. That's what we're going to talk about too. Yeah, here we have some points as well, and this is about goal setting, as we mentioned, or learning objectives. We can talk about different levels of goals. Learning objectives is part of planning a lesson when you know that there is some kind of assessment coming up, or learning objectives that the learners set for themselves, or the goals that they have, which are, in this case, which are broader a bit than just an objective and the small step they can make. Understanding of their progress, and we also had that. Feedback on their strengths and weaknesses. One thing is when a teacher says, okay, yes, I think you can do this well and that well. And the other thing is when you have objective proof of that.
And especially for the younger learners, this is true that exams, like tests, like our yearly tests, can be perceived by young learners in the form of a game, like part of the learning playing surrounding, because young learners these days using computers a lot, and for them stepping from one level to the other is very important. So sometimes teachers explain that you take a while you test and then you can progress or maybe not progress to the next level. So they perceive it in the form of a game. But to succeed, they need to do their homework, learn English and so on. So it's also a very clear motivation for them.
Yeah, and that's what I always say to parents when we present at parents' meetings, that the format of the young learners is a game. They won't even notice that something has changed. Well, they will, because they know it's an exam, but it's a different story here. An example of Cambridge exams, A2 key for schools and B1 preliminary for schools, and some thoughts on how they help motivate students. Currently, those exams are approved by the ministry as the DEPA, right, state leaving exam. A2 key, that's grade 9 general schools, B1 specialized schools. If we're talking about grade 11, this would be either B1 or B2. Yeah, and the certificate is the proof of what they can do with the detailed information on their skills, performance, grades, and yes, if we look at the points, that's an external recognition of their achievements, and it also sets a new goal for themselves. Once they've, for example, achieved and received the A2 key for school certificate, they can then go on and start looking at B1, and it's kind of a challenge for them. So looking at 6 ways, we're going to start with the first one, evidence. So assessment helps learning in terms of providing evidence of learning. And this is a question that I, for example, got asked by my tutors at Delta course. What is the evidence of learning at your lesson? How can you prove that your students have learned something? And one thing is proving it to your tutor. Another thing is proving it to your students, and then letting your students see it themselves. And when I work with adults, for example, right now, one of the biggest challenges is actually to see that to show them that they are progressing. And the higher the level is, the more difficult it is to see, because elementary level, yes, but then when you move on to upper intermediate, advanced,
they seem to be feeling that they are doing the same thing all over and over again. And then probably a completely different story is proving to parents that their children are progressing, and it's not just singing songs and learning some points by heart, but it's really moving on with the English language, right? Yeah.
So we want to ask you to share, how do you evaluate your learners' progress? And this way, how do you show the learners their progress? That's question number 1. There are several options on a lesson-to-lesson basis, module, unit, theme, or at the end of the term. How do you do that? Do you do it on a lesson-to-lesson, module, unit, theme basis, or at the end of the term? And then question number 2, how do your learners evaluate their own progress, if they do? Okay, so type.
Yeah, let's start with the first, just to take it constructively. How about you, Anya? How do you evaluate your students' progress as of now?
I don't do it on a lesson-to-lesson basis, as I teach business English right now, mostly, but we do evaluate the progress at the end of a term. And this is kind of informal assessment. We make presentations, and there are certain criteria against which we then evaluate. They evaluate themselves, each other, and I am the last part of the evaluation.
So it's like a self-assessment and peer assessment.
And teacher assessment, yes.
So we have the answers: module, unit, and theme. All right, very structured. Lesson to lesson, every lesson writes entry informally through questions and answers. Targeted price. Checklist for self-assessment. Quarterly, my students don't assess their progress formally, but they can see what they have learned. Well, then my question is, like, how can they see that they have learned something and that they have progressed with something?
That's the question to me?
No, well, that's the question to our listeners and viewers. and they can see that as years. So how do your learners evaluate their own progress? By speed in answering?
Could be, if that's speaking, right? If your aim is to evaluate fluency, even not just speaking.
Practical, very practical, and they can use English abroad and understand foreigners better.
Self-assessment, yeah.
Doing checks before starting a topic in a class and at the end.
Yeah, lots of current course books also have this checklist. I can do this, I can do that. And sometimes they are neglected, I would say, due to lack of time or something else. But that's a really good thing, just to point to your students and to let them know what they can do. Yeah. Okay. They can say more, they can understand more, they can do something more easily. Yeah, a lot of times making progress to our students means that they've learned 20 words or we've covered present perfect. But the question is, what can they really do with it? And showing them the answer would be.
And I think the issue with learners, I mean, they sometimes seem to attend, especially with the private language schools, they come to the new private language school and say, I know what present perfect is. I know what past simple is. I've studied that a million times with different courses. But when it comes to reality, the assessment of them using that, that's the thing. Yeah, so except from them knowing the theory of the English language, they should also be capable of using it. And this is where assessment comes helpful, because if this is practical, if this is linked to skills, not just the theory, this is the tool that can help you show that they can either use it effectively or they just know about this, but it doesn't help them communicate. All right. And we'll talk about measuring the language skills.
Yeah, and we've mentioned most of those things, and there are so many more. And of course, we can measure either a complex of skills, all four parts of them. We're going to show you the computer adaptive test that Cambridge has introduced, and we're proudly administering now. That can be like a constructor where you can select what you want to assess. You can assess progress, or you can assess results and performance at the end. And the second way of how assessment helps learning is goal setting. We mentioned it a couple of times already, but we cannot stress enough how important it is, and why set goals and what kind of goals. And I like to show this kind of ladder where you measure your success / progress / result in a bit different way, we as teachers, than our students sometimes. When our students come and say, we want to learn English,
and be perfect.
Yes, and I want to speak like Cumberbatch, you know. And I experimented with my group, and I asked them, who is the ideal famous person you would like to be in speaking English? And they really named Queen Elizabeth, Hugh Laurie.
To me, it's Hugh Grant. You know, I would listen to him speaking English forever.
Yeah, well, yeah, they all have their own ideals against which they sometimes compare themselves. This can be not someone famous. This can be their teacher, their, I don't know, friend, the teacher.
But it doesn't really mean that this is the ideal is the one they need. Right. I mean, very often they would understand that reaching some certain level of English would give them the skills they need in their work, study, and so on. And probably they should just stop it where they are, just keep it at the level. But in most cases, Ukrainian are perfectionists, so that they would definitely strive to the level of English of Cumberbatch or Hugh Grant or whoever. Yeah, but it's good to set the goals rather than to reach the ideal always.
Yeah, and when you measure against the ideal, your students, sometimes they think that nothing has happened. However, measuring against the goals is achieving one goal, setting another one, and creating this pathway on the way to their ideal. No one says that ideals are not useful or something, but definitely takes a set of steps and a set of goals when you want to reach the ideal, breaking it into small parts. And the advice that we would like to give to our students perhaps would be to turn around and look at where they started. We sometimes get lost perhaps in the chase after goals and ideals, and we don't notice of how far we've come. Sounds a bit
well, it's like with everything. I wouldn't say it's just the English language or any foreign language mastering. I mean, if you go to the gym, you will see the pictures of ladies and gentlemen with perfect abs that probably are a bit too far from that. But then again, when you practice with time, you set yourself some clearer goals. You are closer to perfection, but probably still not there. Yeah, so it's very often I compare learning the English language with sport. If there are systems in exercising, in, I don't know, eating and everything, you get the results, but you cannot just do it once every year and then drop it, and well, of course, no results are there.
Yeah.
This is like one of the reasons for doing Cambridge English exams is that we believe in the exams that need to be fit for purpose, and they need to be really practical and linked to the real world. Cambridge has conducted several studies all over the world. One of the studies was among the ministries of education, and we were assessing the impact assessment has on education. And it was proven scientifically that in the countries where the assessment is linked to education and where the assessment is linked to the real world skills, and it means that education is linked to real world skills as well, the results are way better, because like it or not, but Ukrainian teachers at the end of grade 11 with 11 grader students, they don't really think much about developing their English language skills, but they would concentrate more on preparing them for ZNO. And unfortunately, our ZNO is not really linked to the real life skills. It's more about surviving the exams, exam taking techniques, about writing the essay in the right style, or being punished for doing it in the wrong way, right? So we believe in the assessment to be fit for purpose, so that there is a special exam for every group of learners of every age. So there's exams for teenagers, we call them Cambridge English for Schools examinations. There are exams for young learners, which are very different from teens exams, and they are all motivating with monkeys and so on. We have exams for business people, we have exams for adults, instructors, as Anna said, like Linguaskill. Being especially popular these days with the world being locked in their houses, but still, well, there's still a need in the assessment which can be taken distantly, and still being reliable. And we believe in the idea that assessment supports learning rather than distracts it from its everyday routine. It's structure this, and the assessment helping inform learning of their mistakes, of the progress, of the successes in learning, and can modify its further ways.
Yeah, and that's actually our way number 3, effective learning outcomes. It's a bit different from goals.
Right.
Goals is a lot of times personal, and one more thing about goals was that they can be short-term, long-term, right? Your long-term goal might be reach B2, but your current level is A2, for example, or English for work, or English to study abroad. That's a broader long-term goal, and then there are short-term goals as well. The learning outcomes are about effective learning and what they can do quicker, more instantly, and how you teachers can see, how we as teachers can see that in the classroom. So the question is, what does effective learning mean to you as a teacher? What does, or perhaps we have students here as well, what does effective learning mean to you? English language learning. Can you let us know in the chat box, please?
Okay, engagement and autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
seeing the result, right?
Mm-hmm.
Practical using of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, achieving your goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah, the learning reflects the teaching, as we can say. Yes, the effective learning reflects the effective teaching. Before that, we used to teach English with more or less the same model, either grammar, translation, or PPP. Right now, there's a variety of methods, and the selection of them depends a lot on the context and on the students we have, it links also to the characteristics of what you do in the classroom. Here we have some questions and some characteristics of effective learning and learners. So a lot of times it's about engagement when students ask themselves, can I do this? Can I really do that? Or motivation, this is active learning. Do I want to do that? Thinking, how do I do this? Analyzing and critically evaluating their own activities. And the teacher also is there. However, the role of the teacher is shifting. And one of the tasks that we believe we have to do when we prepare for exams or when we learn English in the classroom is creating warm, supportive environment and fostering positive relationships. I myself I'm sorry. No, wait for an hour. I myself am an ambassador of building rapport with students, and another topic to talk about is how to build rapport and how it can help students. And when we are insightful and empathetic to what is happening to our students as personalities, helps us and informs learning, and then helps us prepare and for assessment and reconcile everything and put them together. If we look at the cone of experience that our learners go through, and we as teachers are constantly learning also go through that, there is a pyramid that reflects how people remember. It's their learning activity, how they do everything. And then what is the outcome at the end? So we here see then that reading and hearing, passive perception, is remembered at the level of 20%. Maximum. This is like lectures or teacher talking and telling everyone.
So it means that probably 10% of whatever we say today.
I just thought about that.
is going to be with our, I mean, we will have the recording of the webinar shared with you.
We should think of some kind of task.
Yeah, but I should think of some form of an interaction there.
Yeah. But viewing images, watching videos, it's another level, and that's 30%. So we will hope that 30% is going to be still taken. Then we have attending and watching the demonstration. So our chances are higher, actually, 50%. Right. Participating in hands-on workshops. As soon as the quarantine is over.
Happy to invite you to our workshops as well.
Yeah. And then when you do it yourself, when you simulate model experience, when you design a presentation, my example with business English students, for example, that's doing the real thing 90% of what we do. And the outcomes, yes, moving from defining, describing to analyzing, creating, and evaluating. So basically your students and our students can evaluate, or will be able to evaluate themselves more or less objectively once they get to doing what they're doing. And the exam situation is actually at the bottom as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I mean, the exams are these days very practical, and they are about what they can do with the language, how they can play with them, for example, in the part of use of English. It's not about write the rule of present simple. It's about showing that you know how to do that. You know how to say things differently using different grammar constructions. You read and you understand what's written there. You listen and you are able to analyze the information and answer the questions. So this is all about this last layer of doing things. rather than just reading and like answering the theory, right?
Yeah, as my tutor said once, the worst classroom is the silent classroom, all the time, all the time. Sometimes we do keep silence.
I think we need to unmute on all mics.
No, in our case, this is just respect to each other and making sure that the sound gets out from the session in a good way.
All right, so let's talk about motivation increase. Exams can be there.
Yeah, exams do increase motivation. The question is what kind? And there is a theory by Victor Vroom. He's the professor at Yale University. He teaches business and leadership. He created this theory that comprises three main parts. If I do something, will that lead to performance, to me doing it, being able to do it? And when I do it, will it lead to results? And then will the results lead to the rewards? So it is actually a complex system of stimulus response, if we can say, actions leading, intentions leading to actions, actions results, results reward. And in the case of exams, effort and is when we prepare for the exam. Performance is when we basically do the exam, and the reward could be named a certificate or whatever.
Yeah, well, a certificate could be, but just as something tangible. Because like we all need to touch something that comes from Cambridge, looks nice, and this is more of the inner reward that you get. So something you can boast to your friends and post on Facebook. But in reality, the reward with language learning is a way more longer term perspective. Speaking of teenagers, for example, because knowing the foreign language will help them in their adult life. But I mean, speaking to teenagers, they don't really think that's, I mean, more than teenagers, I think, not all of them, think of the longer term perspective. So something explained in a simpler words, like you will get a certificate, probably the exemption from your DEPA school living exam, is something that they would perceive as a reward. But in reality, this is a way more impactful on their further life, right?
Yeah. And then we know that there are two kinds of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. And yesterday we had the similar webinar. Dasha and I talked to each other whether intrinsic or extrinsic motivation is more important, or both, in learning and preparing for exams. What do you think? Can you let us know in the chat box which of these motivational parts, intrinsic or extrinsic, has more impact on the learners in English language learning? Is it intrinsic, extrinsic, both? Can you let us know in the chat box?
Both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Both. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're almost united in in the answers. Both, both. Yes, yes.
My idea was that, I mean, it would depend on the type of the learner, of course, and their age. To me, extrinsic is more like vivid with the younger learners and teenagers, probably because I'm not a great believer in the teenagers motivating themselves.
Yeah.
But intrinsic becoming more effective with adults when they are more thoughtful of themselves. They know why they are doing it. Probably some extrinsic motivation at times is also helpful.
Yeah, but
like a magic kick.
But if an adult student doesn't want to do it himself or herself, there is no way. I firmly believe in that. There is no way we can make them do that. And intrinsic motivation oftentimes links to a growth mindset. This is also a theory of learning and achieving things. A theory when students fail and what they do with it, because learning is about not just successes, but also failures. And growth mindset is about focusing on what we can do, even if we fail, not giving up, keep moving on, and all those things linked to it.
No, ideally, it's both, of course. Like,
yeah,
if there's the intrinsic and the extrinsic, they are clearly defined, and then the learner knows why he or she is doing that, then it's like the perfect utopia scenario, which I think never happens, but
yeah,
this is what we need to strive for.
Yeah, yeah. So the question here to you and to us is, how can we help learners become more effective learners? Here are some ideas. Take a look. We can play with them. It works with kids especially, but then not only that, listening to them, acting as a sounding board, that probably, I think we need to
elaborate.
This is when the teacher says everything he or she intends to do, explains why, he notices or she notices some concerns or worries with the students, and he or she sounds it. Especially with, again, adults, it's important to tell them why they're doing it, why you as a teacher think this is effective, perhaps even give them the basic aspects of methodology, and sound the feelings and concerns. And all of those ideas, perhaps, of course, you can add some more, and let us know in the chat box if you would like to add something to the list. But also it shows the shift in the role of the teacher, which is shifting from just voicing the material and like the information to becoming a facilitator, the helper, and just the person who can teach how to learn rather than just give the information. So teachers no longer act as Google, because there is Google there for the information. And we cannot compete with Google.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't. It just makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right. But becoming the one who can help them or train them learn and analyze, and all those 21st century skills that they need to have in the future.
And the teacher now is not the only source of information. That is true. And it often happens that students doubt what we say. And that's not the worst thing. That's not bad. They have the ability. Our strength is in guiding them and showing them, the way. Way number 5 is linking the classroom and the real world. And here we are going to talk a bit about the methodological aspects of how tests are made, just because it affects, again, effective testing and assessment affects and impacts effective learning. And if good assessment has positive washback effect and all of the things listed, this means that it leads to better results, and it structures and does all the things we've already mentioned. The washback effect, that's an interesting term. And when we were thinking about the webinar, the idea was actually to name it the washback effect. But then we chose a little bit broader topic. Can you let us know in the chat box, type if you know what a washback effect is?
A very compact English word with the very, very broad meaning. That's the beauty of the English language. They can put it in a very short one, but then when you need to translate it into Ukrainian, you get really longer texts eventually, because you need to explain the term, which is non-existent in the Ukrainian language. All right, so do we have any ideas on what washback effect is? Please type your answers in the chat box. All right. The impact that assessment has on learning and teaching. Right.
Yes, Andrei, thank you. Yeah. Maybe some other things. If you're not sure, just take a guess. Is it connected with,
It's a very philosophical question. It can be. Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, yes, a washback effect is the way the learning process is affected when some kind of evaluation or assessment happens at some point, either at the end, or in the middle, or in cycles. When you prepare as a no, to the no and forget about speaking. That's an example of a...
Yeah, they just don't mix washback with brainwash, because these are two different things. Well, that's the feedback. In a way, yes. When it comes to language, I mean, Cambridge English qualifications, we say that our exams has a washback effect when it comes to exam preparation. Because, for example, you are preparing for B2 first qualification, targeted at the level B2 of the CEFR, but the tasks there would not only be targeted at B2, there would be tasks at B1 as well. And of course, to cope with B2 level tasks, you need to know what is English as level A1, A2, B1, and B2. Well, in simpler terms, exam preparation allows you to revise whatever has been studied in the previous levels. And plus you sort of layer your knowledge one and up on top and on top, so that you are not able to forget things. Well, this is the washback effect. Well, I hope I was able to explain that.
Yeah. And also the learning process changes depending on the ZNO part. Yes, is when you forget about speaking. This is a negative washback effect. There's a positive one and negative one, yes. And we believe that the positive washback effect helps and brings the results and structures the classroom environment. Easy to integrate into curriculum. Another point about good assessment. It shouldn't be something extra apart from the whole process.
Yeah, it shouldn't be something like separate. It's actually part of the learning, just put in the form of the assessment.
Yeah. And fair and useful, we're going to jump down. Fairness is a bit subjective, but still, when students have a feeling that the assessment, any kind, and we're going to talk about different kinds, formal and informal in a bit, but if it's fair, they agree and they comply with the results. And useful, informing all the stakeholders of the process as well. And the question that you might be asking yourselves, and we've been asking ourselves as well, how can we ensure that the test is benefiting learners? Everything we're talking about today is actually how to make assessment beneficial to the learning process and to the learners. What do you think? Can our learners benefit from the test if we use authentic tasks, or if we give them formative feedback on performance? What is the key element of making sure that the learners are benefiting from the tests they're taking? Can you let us know in the chat box?
Through feedback.
Okay. Feedback.
I would say that to me as a learner, I need to realize why I'm doing that. So it's not just the assessment that is taking place out of nowhere. Just suddenly my teacher wants me to do the exam. I need to realize why I'm doing this and what it is for me there. So if I realize that we are assessing some certain thing in the part that I was learning, and once I finish, I will be able to understand whether I'm good or bad at that, that's okay. If that's just assessment for the sake of assessment, not linked to anything, I'm not happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah, Andrea also mentioned confidence with using language. Yeah. When it comes to testing, there are lots of different internal and methodology terms, but these things impact the benefit that the test brings to the student. It kind of opens a bit a window into how tests are made, and we as teachers, we don't always have to make tests ourselves. Cambridge is there to provide reliable assessment. But in order to understand how it works, a good idea would be to think and look at the test from the perspective of validity. And the validity of the test is understanding whether the test is measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. The validity, for example, of an exam, is it measuring really the skills that that are focused and that they will really use? Is it using the relevant language and so on? The purpose we mentioned. Why? Test takers. Dasha said that there are different age groups that the tests are aimed at, and the good test has a design and content specifically aimed at certain group. Kids have their young learners exams, adults have their formats. Reliability, trusted, construct, how is it organized? Is it logically progressing? One part it starts with the easier parts, ends with more difficult ones. How is it organized? Tasks and the impact. The impact is the very important part.
I think in Cambridge, like if you read our like journals published at our web page, you would see the abbreviation called VRIPQ.
I've seen it.
Yeah, it stands for validity, reliability, impact, positive effect, and quality. Well, quality stands above all. But I would like to concentrate on the positive impact the assessment has to have, and just on the positive side. So the assessment itself has to be positive. And you should not be employing the punishment in the assessment. It's like the punishment is very often in the assessment is like, you write an essay, it's in the wrong style, you get 0. You write an essay, you've made too many mistakes, and then you -3 for grammar, -2 for this grammar, so you just calculate the mistake, concentrate on them. And the result at the end is like the very poor mark. But then you need to look at it from the reader's perspective, if we talk about assessing writing, for example, and from the point that, well, there was the act of writing in a way. Yes, it's probably not ideal, but it should be linked against the task, whether this is informative, whether you can understand what the author or the writer wanted to say, and so on. So there has to be everything has to be assessed from the like positive side and from its impact on learning and on life, right?
Yeah, and that's basically the slide here reflects what Dasha said. Tests should test what they are set out to test. They produce scores which can be trusted, support learning, be practical, and fit for purpose. Is there a Russian equivalent for fit for purpose? I think that's such a good expression which cannot, again.
Well, I mean, we can think about this, but probably it's in a sentence, not in a phrase.
Yeah. Well, it meets the needs and the goals that the learners have, for sure. Yeah, fit for purpose. And way number 6, kind of wrapping it all together, reconciling all aspects of learning and everyone taking part in the learning process. And here we have beautiful figures. That's Lego, right?
Yeah, Lego. But formative assessment is something that happens in the classroom. It can be in any form. So it's not necessarily just the test or unit test or lesson test or anything. It can be in the form of a just question to your learners. And the summative assessment is something that happens usually at the end of the course, the end of the study year, and so on. It's more to inform and to wrap up your education process. The only thing I don't understand is why the formative or why the summative assessment is the Darth Vader.
Should be.
It's not that bad, and though it is very often perceived as an evil, it is the way to sort of inform you as learners whether you have completed the course correctly or not. It informs the school management, parents of the efficiency of their program, and it sets the standards for the whole learning process. Though it can be punishing at times, if not successful.
Yeah.
But generally, classroom assessment and large-scale assessment, they are intersecting with learning, and ideally, classroom assessment should lead to improving learning and leading to the larger scale assessment, which is linked to learning. So it's not something happening separately. So you cannot be learning something and then comes the assessment, which is about the absolutely different thing. Then there's no need to learn anything. You get down to exam preparation and thinking about what's in the exam. And this is unfortunately something that happens very often in Ukraine. Ideally, this should be different, and a lot of things are done to reconcile learning and assessment. And like, I'm very happy that with the new Ukrainian school, this is actually the steps taken by the Ukrainian Ministry of Education. These nice pink circles and the turquoise shade. This is about where the assessment can be. So in the very, very center is this, in a smaller circle, is the assessment as learning, which helps to inform learners of their mistakes and the improvement that needs to be made. The bigger circle is the assessment for learning, in order to set the goals for learners and the targets they need to achieve. And in the wider circle is this summative assessment. This is where we assess the fact of learning. This is not where you can probably improve something, but you actually show what you have mastered, and what you can do. And the very trendy term these days in modern methodology is the LOA, or the learning-oriented assessment. So with the learning-oriented assessment, we put learning at the heart of assessment, and we do the assessment for the sake of learning rather than the assessment for the sake of assessment, or just to see the results. So these are different forms of placement tests, progress tests, continual assessment, teacher-based assessment, or like any kind of assessment that takes place during the learning in order to modify the learning process. When you do this regularly, lesson to lesson, between the tasks that you set, so you teach, train, assess, modifying your teaching, then train again, then assess, and then you move on to the next level. And it empowers teachers and learners to set individual goals, to monitor the individual performance, and to see the performance of the whole group. And I'm going to show you the very nice slide with some people, objects here. And these are, in short, this is the classroom box, which sort of wraps all the educational activities here. So I'm gonna draw a bit on the whiteboard. So in the center is the teacher with its individual characteristic. We sometimes forget that teachers can also be very different, and the teacher's individual characteristic impacts the whole process of learning in the classroom. But that's probably the story of the other webinar, of how teachers depend on learners and vice versa, and how learners depend on teaching. And there's learner A, there she is, it can be he actually. This is not a very gender neutral slide.
I just thought about it.
Yeah, we have to have some boys here just to not be very gender biased.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, generally that's a scheme. So the learner can also have their individual needs. There's the very different learning backgrounds. Some students are stronger, some are weaker, because probably they come from, different social backgrounds. It also impacts a lot. The relationship between other learners impacts me as a learner, because, for example, if Anya doesn't do her homework and we sit together and the task is to do the project work, then it impacts me as a learner. So Anya, please do your homework.
Oh, I'll try next time.
And it also impacts my relationship with others. which is all the very, well, logical things if you think of them. But in this individual learning characteristics, we are all placed in different subgroups. We are all sort of wrapped in the class syllabus, which dictates us our activities. And we are all in the setting of the school type. So it can be a specialized school with more hours for the English language, or it can be just a general school with just 2 lessons a week, and probably I will have more challenges in mastering this class syllabus, even though this is a relaxed one already. And in the wider context, we will have a lot of social impacts that will depend on us. Like these days, we're all sitting at home on the quarantine, and we cannot see our teacher face to face, and we go to Zoom or any other platform to do the teaching. Everything in this classroom box impacts our surrounding, but it doesn't mean that all, like the approach that can be unified to everyone can be employed, which means that I should stop doing this. Yeah. Which means that the learning-oriented approach is the one where the personal world of one candidate is opposed to the social world of the many, where the education is opposed to assessment, but this can all be intersected into the logical sort of processes where you, as I said, teach, train, assess. The assessment of one task impacts your further learning activities. Once you see that you've covered, well, the whole group covered the learning, you are able to move on further with like learning something new. Well, with learning-oriented assessment, you can see this was Cambridge course called Empower. This is where 2 Cambridges united, the Cambridge University Press and Cambridge Assessment English. They work out the course book where the assessment happens really regularly, like every lesson. Yeah, you can do this with online platform. The learning are like learners are directed to their own platform where they can do this. Yeah, and modify their further learning on. And as part of the learning-oriented assessment, we actually designed the Linguaskill, which is I think this is the revolutionary product in the assessment world these days, especially now in the situations like this. Linguaskill is the one which enables you to define what you really want to assess, when you want to do this, so you can construct your own test yourself. And the most important part of it is that this is all adaptive. So depending on the level of student, the next, like the question types, their level goes either up or down.
Yeah, and we as grade are proudly administering this test, as I mentioned. Having done several groups already, we see that our candidates are really happy to receive some of the results even instantly. And the test report you see here is the example of the online statement of results that you get. If we take reading and listening only, we can get our results instantly. Speaking and writing, 48 hours. Speaking and writing, if I may just open a bit the secret of assessment behind that, speaking happens with the computer, and then it is assessed on a 2-level basis by the computer. The machine learning, they apply all these machine learning technology right now, and the artificial intelligence as well. And then the experts back at Cambridge still confirm the results. So this way, Cambridge makes sure that we have quick adaptive test which adapts to the answers that you give. It can get more difficult or easier with every task depending on what answers we give. We at Grade also have taken that. Our teachers confirmed they are level C1 and above, and we hope that you do take your time and take a look at Linguaskill. Perhaps it can help you and your learners understand where you are and help you set new goals and see the direction towards which to move. We already showed that and talked a bit about the main suite of exams, and right now we are working with more than 100 partners, exam preparation centers, and spring is the busiest season for us. But quarantine is not the only thing. We're still going to administer exams as soon as we're back, the whole range, and we will send you some more information in the email after the webinar. We are wrapping up, and before we all say goodbye, perhaps you have some questions that you would like to ask us, or comments or anything. Let us know in the chat box.
Now, just while we're waiting for the question, just was at the webinar today and with my colleagues in Cambridge, and one of the measures that are now being taken in relation to like Corona all over the world is to allow Ukrainian centers to postpone, to choose the exam dates, and that's something really supportive. And when it comes to learning-oriented assessment, there will be the course shortly, preparing for Linguaskills. I mean, you cannot prepare for it because it's adaptive, but it's like the intro to the format, what it takes, just you can try yourself. So that's a very, very good thing.
We'll look forward to it.
Yeah. And it's going to be based on Empower. I saw a comment that someone is working with it, so good to read it. All right, we have a lot of thanks.
A lot of thanks, and we would like to thank you as well. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy your weekend. Stay healthy. Wash your hands
very often, right? Yeah, and just enjoy yourself during the weekends. Do whatever you think you want to do in this free time. Read your favorite books that you've been postponing for a while. Cook something if you haven't done this in a while. Just enjoy yourself. It's not just about the quarantine, is also about enjoying ourselves.
And it's a great time to learn everything we've been wanting to learn for so long. We hope that with the webinar, we kind of struck some interest or curiosity, sparked some curiosity to the questions related to assessment. And of course, taking every aspect, there is so much more to read and to talk about. So perhaps the thoughts that we discussed and expressed today will lead you to reading a bit more about assessment and testing and thinking about learning and reconciling them both. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dasha.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a
good evening.
Evening and weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, the certificates.
Oh, yeah.
The certificates, yes. We will be sending you the certificates with the email after the webinar. You should receive them by Monday. The recording of the webinar, the certificate, and some useful links. So thanks again. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.